Good morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I am great. Where am I? Let me give you a view here. I'm going to move over this way.
Exactly. When I first saw this picture, I said, okay, young mountains. This may be the Tetons, but that castle is not in the Tetons.
No,
That looks like the German Alps, Bavaria. That isn't
yes,
Neuschwanstein,
it is
is it? Okay.
Neuschwanstein. Yes, it's
Okay.
Neuschwanstein. This, I believe, was taken 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Isn't that incredible with the fog in the valley? And
Yeah, beautiful photo.
yeah, I
That's right
think
on a lake. That's why
yeah,
the,
yeah,
yes.
it's
Mhm.
incredible. Um, Beautiful, beautiful place. Beautiful.
Yes.
They speak German in an accent that's almost impossible to understand. I mean,
Correct. Well, they were their own country for so long.
Mm. Yeah, my German was learned in the northern part of Germany, so it is considered Hochdeutsch, High German. But I mean, you go to Bavaria, and it's almost impossible.
Right.
It's not unlike going from Boston or New York down to South Carolina.
Right. Hmm.
We're talking about messaging, Deirdre, and getting messaging out. And it's about the fact that there are many people, there's a large group of people just they are not understanding what's going on. Now, I think it's broken into three major pieces. The people that elected or are major, I shouldn't even say that are major supporters of the president and the administration. What I'm seeing is they don't care about the specifics. They just like seeing things changing. They want it to just move. And
Agree.
so they don't, they really don't seem to care if it seems chaotic or if it seems they don't know things. They don't know the answers. They don't know the why. Maybe times they don't even know the what or the objective of the what. Think about tariffs or think about negotiations or trade negotiations, just to be two examples. Then you've got the other side of the equation who sees it as just chaotic, no strategy, no end game, even lack of good execution. It's sloppy in their mind. Um, and because they also don't see the messages that, and they could maybe not be looking, but they don't see them. And then there is the one that probably politically you'd want to be concerned about, and that's the vast middle who voted one way or the other and are trying to figure out, did I do a good thing or not? Right? And that's hard to tell right now. And so, Deirdre, perhaps you can explain to folks what you and I went through yesterday.
Delighted to, because I've actually been commenting on this since the inauguration, that there is so much change going on, but no one seems to be explaining why certain change is happening. And then when you hear messages about why are they taking funding away from starving babies, or why are they firing all of these workers, or why are they doing this? And I'm not seeing messages to even explain what's going on. And to me, with my communications, marketing, business building background, this is a major lack. You always explain what you're going to do. Um, and you've been saying back, oh, yes, messages are going out. And I've been saying, well, I'm not seeing these messages. And we started to talk in terms of I tend to look at the traditional media. Well, you tend to be on online media all the time. And maybe messages are getting out in online media, but I'm certainly not seeing them in the traditional media. And the traditional media are frankly where a lot of the people in the middle, I thought, may be getting their messaging. And I dropped in, I thought, because this gets to what we did yesterday. Because we're baffled about why there's such a disconnect in messaging, you and I investigated what we had started to identify as a fragmentation in the media. That maybe it's a fragmentation out there so that different people are seeing different messages. And we investigated what's going on there, and we found, frankly, incredible fragmentation, more than I think either of us expected with even the numbers of trad media, traditional media being lower than I thought they were, and you picking up on just a fragmentation all over the place, so that the main problem here may actually be the distribution of the messages. And let me get it going with one statistic, and then Tom, please take over and explain what we did yesterday in depth. The one statistic that really interested me is that last week on the main evening news programs with the main anchors there, not the local news, the national news, reached only, across all the programs, reached only 17 million viewers. That's 17 million viewers across the main channels, which is an astonishingly low number. So you take it from here, Tom, and explain the fragmentation further.
Yeah, and in always with numbers, it's so hard and we had to get time zones right and time slots right. And this was not the highest rated program on each thing. We had to take into, when we said traditional media, we had to include Fox News in there and also CNN, along with ABC, NBC, and CBS. So we did a lot of different ways, but any way you cut it, and who knows whether that's wrong by 100%, it could be wrong by 100%, maybe it's 30 million. That's still a very small number compared to the size of the US.
That's 10% of the population, Tom. Even if it's 30, it's just 10% of the population.
Exactly. So rather than focusing on the number itself, what we were surprised about, we saw nothing that got any higher than 20 million people, and it wasn't even really that high. And it took you getting into famous people, celebrity people, to get into the beginning of the 100 million. And when you consider that we have 300 million people in this country plus, and then you consider the fact that how many of those are actually, even of the 100, let's say that Elon Musk has, or it's in roughly in that, those are followers on X. We have no idea how many people actually actively look at the vast majority of what is done there during the day. So we didn't go terribly deep, but I will say we spent what, 6 or 7 hours, Deirdre, on this between two sessions yesterday, because we were shocked at the small size of the numbers. The other thing we noticed too is we saw the fragmentation taking, they had 3 different pieces, Deirdre. One was what you could call the traditional and the non-traditional, the traditional, the new, the traditional, the online, but that becomes confusing because the online side could be, well, that's BBC online, CNN online, New York Times online. So you've got the traditional media and the new. Then you've got a fragmentation to short form and long form, meaning short snippets like on an alert on something like a Facebook or a TikTok or X. And then you've got long form, which many times takes the fact of a discussion among people or an interview with 2 people. And then that used to be heavily weighted to written, and now there's a heavy weighting to non-written, all the non-written forms, video, audio, podcasts, so forth. We just found that fragmentation, along with the fact that it doesn't surprise you then that the numbers start to decline and get smaller in each one of these. Most of these people we looked at a lot of people and institutions, and we saw numbers that it was generally in the million range.
1 million.
Shockingly, right?
Yeah.
It was that was a consistent number, was about 1 million. Then we saw some that were in the 5 to 7 range, which you'd expect, and that was where the bulk were. Every once in a while you'd get 10, 15, but even the traditional media for a day average last week, we had to add them all together, all of those sources I mentioned as traditional, just to get to, and the number we came up with was 17. So even if it's wrong by 100%, that's still not a lot of people. And who knows, like I said, is that, when you say CNN, is that the feed in the airport or the gym? who knows? And how many are you picking up there? So it's hard to know these days. But regardless, the point is real. There is huge fragmentation. And so what that leaves you with is you can have messages going out in a handful of places. And the example that we have used a couple of times is you've said to me, and the first thing we do every morning is we get on the phone and we talk about, okay, Deirdre, what did you see and what did I see? You're focusing more on the traditional media, including the online aspects of that. And I do know that you throw in the View every once in a while into that, Deirdre, but
Only when it's on a screen in
oh,
the gym
sure,
like that.
sure. Yeah, that counts too, Deirdre.
Right.
Yeah, that'll be a very cold day before you ever do that. But I focus on the more of the new media, including the long form podcasts and so forth. And we hear very different messages. You'll say to me, I'm hearing nothing about this. This is getting concerning. People are concerned. I say, Deirdre, the White House issued 3 statements in the last week, very clear about it. And then we look and see the White House has maybe 1 million people following it on X. And the one thing we didn't really investigate, because it's hard to get the data and get comparable data, is some of the truly more social, like Facebook. And it's hard to understand what a LinkedIn is, because that's more, if you're going to talk about, that's more about people and the organizations they work for. So ours was not a scientific analysis, but what it was very clear that there's a strong indication of this vast fragmentation, and that causes a problem. So what problems does that cause for me, Deirdre?
Well, let me pick up on that and let me go back to the screens in the gym. You know, this morning when I'm on my treadmill in the gym, I see, say, Fox News over here and MSNBC and CNBC and so forth. And what's truly astonishing, even though these are different traditional media, they select completely different stories. So that someone at home watching one of these channels is simply not going to even hear about some of the other topics coming up. And this is a real problem in that the lack of messaging is not even giving the media the substance so they can present a different point of view. So that the traditional media are simply moving ahead with their traditional storylines, their traditional points of view, and they have no content out there that someone could even ask a question about. And that's very obvious when you look at a number of the different media at the same time. But I think a further problem to this is that the lack of messaging is creating a vacuum. And we know that nature abhors a vacuum, so that things rush in to fill it. And that's where you get all of this misinformation, all of this mismessaging. We're starting to hear the term AI slop to describe all of the stuff out on the internet and in these channels created by various of these AI programs. Well, I'm starting to think of this as news slop. So in the vacuum, various messages get out there without any connection to reality. Let me give you an example, and this is one I mentioned to you this morning. I get, as a news feed every morning, a business journal that covers Westchester County, New York, and Fairfield County, Connecticut, which is where I'm located. The headline on the news journal this morning was that the local Westchester County congressional representative told supporters over the weekend that the Trump administration definitely intends to shut down Social Security. Now, you and I, Tom, have heard the opposing point of view that they're not going to, and frankly, both of us believe that there's no way this is going to happen. But how in the world could a representative say with authority, without being countered to the point where this was a headline on the day's business journal, that it's going to happen? This is what I call news slop. But this is what's out there. that partial explanations don't counter this. Um, and there are claims of all sorts that we see out there. What's going on with all of the fired workers? Well, a lot of the traditional media are featuring people who have been fired, and you see the personal stories about someone who was in a job for many years and loved the job, and oh, it's a cute story. But we're not hearing the other side of it, which is, and this is the Trump administration. We've got to say here, Tom, that you and I are not political
Yeah.
here. We're just presenting points of view from the main political parties here. Well, the Trump administration would point to government bloat, overstaffing of departments, lack of trimming of programs that were old or have served their purpose and are no longer valid, and all of this. Plus, we know that the Biden administration increased the size of the federal government by 8 to 10% in the years 2022, 2023, and 2024. So that, and we're nowhere near cutting back the size of the federal government to the size it was in 2021 yet. None of that is getting out there to oppose the stories presented by the personal stories of workers who have been fired. And this is where I've been saying that the messaging from the Trump administration is just not good. And even while you're saying, but the messaging is out there, the Trump administration has issued press release after press release saying that they're not going to touch Social Security. That messaging is not getting to people who are hearing the other side of it. There's this just total lack of messaging because of the distribution problem, because of the vacuum problem out there. And we could go into all sorts of examples of this. I'm actually turning a page of notes because there's just so much. But I also want to point out that it's a problem also from the Democrats' point of view because of some of the messaging that is coming out from someone or another on the Democratic spectrum of views. One could easily get the idea that the Democrats are in favor of Latin American street gangs taking over American cities, or they're in favor of student protests trashing buildings on college campus, or they're in favor of government bloat and wasteful spending. So this mismessaging is really just all over the place on the spectrum. Both parties are suffering from it badly. So again, skipping over a lot of the examples we have, and we've got message examples all over the place, to get to the issue of what do we as business leaders do when we're faced with messaging that's frankly just all over the place and no one can tell what's real. And then it becomes our job in relation to our entities to figure out enough of what's real so we can proceed with our businesses. Comes back to our three questions, Tom, doesn't it? What am I missing? What are the motivations? And are they aligned with my motivations as a business builder? And then is time my friend or enemy? And let's look at this. What am I missing? And please, Tom, I know you've got things to say
Oh,
here, so
please
please
go ahead. Go ahead.
jump in whenever. What am I missing? First thing to look at is what's the source here? What's this particular source telling me? Is this real? Could it possibly be real? Or is this news slop? Is this complete information? Or is this just input from one point on the political spectrum? Then start to think about why might a particular change be happening? Why, for example, are the tariffs happening? And we went into this in our last video, Tom, an explanation of the whole NAFTA question and readdressing the balancing in manufacturing and all of this. I won't go into that again. But think about why could this change be happening? Then think about what are the priorities of the people doing the messaging? What are the priorities of the administration? What are the priorities of the Democrats? What are the priorities of the people who are the source of this particular news feed? And why are they saying this particular thing? The more fragmented the distribution of the news, the more that you have to question the source of any particular point of news, and the more that you have to, for example, set up your own read so that you can make sure that you do your own feed. Tom, do you want to jump in and talk about how you set up your feed here?
Yeah, this is interesting because we decided that we needed to get a view of this back a number of months ago, because we were starting to see that some of the things that you and I were seeing were not consistent. This happened during the campaign and then continued on. So you took the traditional media and I took the new media, the non-traditional, the more online and newer force. And what we ended up doing was you ended up having to move to not just the print version, but the online version so that you could see what they were doing during the day. Because it was interesting to see how their editorial view on something would change during the day versus the print that you got. The thing that I ended up having to do, and we were talking about this again this morning, I had to take months to go through and to figure out what were reliable sources for each side. And I get asked this question a lot. I know you know, Deirdre.
Right.
I get asked the question a lot. Where can I go for clean viewpoints on a broad spectrum? You and I call that traditional journalism.
Right.
And it's very hard. We have yet to find, neither you nor I have found one place where you can count on what you and I would think of as a professional journalism being executed. We have
Correct.
not found a single place. And that's unfortunate. But I've got in a couple of different feeds, tens of feeds. And I will regularly tell you here's what I'm seeing. But before I even say that, I'll say I've seen it a number of different places. I feel fairly comfortable because, and it's not just repeating what somebody else said. It's the source was different, and you have to do that, which is really a shame because it's incredibly time consuming. If we weren't trying to figure this out, we could not spend the amount of time we do on this.
Right.
I mean, we've been preparing the subject for 3 weeks. We're working on another one that by the time we do it is going to take at least 3 or 4. But this one has taken the vast majority of the time over 3 weeks to try to figure our way out. And
Right.
it takes, and I end up having to look at multiple sources and then judge stories and judge the feed of the story and judge it against other feeds to say, do I believe? There's one story about judges in Washington that I still don't necessarily, I believe the story, but I've never seen it repeated. I've never seen it refuted, but I see it being repeated by the same source every couple of days. And it's sensational and it would favor one side, but I don't believe it. I
Mhm.
just don't believe it. Now, think about, and I know you think about this, think about if that was just my source of news, right?
Mhm.
That was my consolidation point.
Right.
Call it NBC Evening News, Nightly News. How many people just do that? And I think
Right.
there are, in an age group, I think there are people that just do that. Now, according to the data, it's not Lester Holt, right? It's David Muir that has the
Yeah.
larger numbers, at least last week he did. Um, but who knows? So you can't rely on this single source, certainly not the New York Times, certainly not just the Wall Street Journal. And Deirdre, you had an interesting observation about your view of the editorial shift in the New York Times recently. So why don't you spend a second on that?
It's my sense that the Times. I have to explain. I've been reading the New York Times since fourth grade. The Algerian War of Independence against France was going on at that time, so I've been reading it for many, many decades. And so I have a long view of the editorial policies of the Times. And it had been my view that in the past 10 years, the Times had taken a very strong left turn. Everything was very left. It's my sense that they keep trying to move now back into the center, but they almost can't quite get there. But they're trying and they get credit for that. The way that the Wall Street Journal, another of the publications I've been reading for many decades, had more of a strong right turn than it has now. It's trying to move in. That is, I think, some of the what I'll call the best known of the traditional media are trying to present different points of view, but there are certain problems with this. One is that they have staffs of reporters who have been reporting in one direction or the other, and they can't do wholesale firing of people. They're not going to do that. So they still have the preponderance of reporting with reporters following their own points of view. That's my interpretation. I could be wrong and people may disagree with me here, but it just becomes easier to go with what you have with the infrastructure. And remember, people can be infrastructure that you have, and with the audiences you have already, than to try to make sure that your journalism is balanced
So one of
across
the
all points.
observations, though, you've made to me, Deirdre, over the last few really weeks, is you see that the distribution of political stories versus non-political stories is changing in the New York Times. At least, again, this is all opinion of one. We're just trying to give you things to think about from as neutral a point as we can.
Right. My comment was that with the same reporting being done on the same stories in the political end, that more of the paper seems to be taken up by non-political stories. And we know this. We know that, for example, in the New York Times gets a significant number of its online subscribers from people who follow their cooking stories, which is great. They have great recipes. I've cooked many of their recipes, and they're great. Um, but that's an example, Tom, of how you can't necessarily trust the numbers in terms of political viewpoint. If a third of their subscribers are really people who want the recipes, then that third does not count toward the political orientation. So
Yeah,
this ties in with all of the difficulty in interpreting how messages are getting out here.
yeah, there's no doubt. The point that you were making a minute ago is one of the reasons that could be is because you still have the same team of people. So you
Correct.
have to just kind of redirect, and you can't have the people that were reporting one way now report the other. So you just have them do something else. I don't know that much about it. You do. You've been in that world before, not me. But I would also say that one of the things that became really clear to us, Deirdre, is when we started looking at how much people are getting paid, that the economics don't work anymore for some of the traditional media companies. The salaries they're paying their anchors just don't work. The numbers that we saw on MSNBC do not work. Uh,
And that's why they're getting rid of people and doing a lot of substituting of people, but not necessarily changing their point of view.
so I would just say to everybody that the thing that we want to focus on here is that we're trying to focus on the facts and the implications of the facts. The one thing I want to make sure everybody realizes is we understand everybody has a person, everybody's a person first, and they face a personal situation. And so we are not immune to understanding that there are real personal stories, there are real personal hardships going on here. No matter where you are, whether you sit in the media, you sit in a part of the government that's been downsized or will be downsized, we don't we understand that everybody is a person first. So we're trying to look at the situation, not trying to get down into the weeds. But one thing I will tell you, Deirdre, that was encouraging is that, and I'm pretty sure this is public, that I saw a talk by a serious Silicon Valley software CEO, and he's part of the Doge team. And he mentioned that, yes, this was public. I think it might have, I don't know where exactly it was. Anyway, he mentioned that the people in Treasury that he was working with on the Doge side meaning he's Doge and he's working with people that are there. He said those people know what they're doing, they're competent, they're capable, and what they've lacked is the infrastructure to help them do what they need to do. And I won't get into any of the others, but it was the thing that I took away from that was heartening is he said, look, I haven't, that the bulk of the people I've worked, they're very capable. They really know what they're doing. They want to do the right things. We haven't helped them, giving them what they need to be able to do the job. So he was encouraged by that. So am I when you hear that, because
Mhm.
we need good people. And it's in the organizations we know, that I know and you know, uh, I've said the same thing, that Deirdre, I know the people on the ground are really good and they've had a hard time sometimes fitting in to whatever they're being asked to do. Again, we're not trying to judge whether that's right or wrong or not, but it just, no place is made up of just bad people, right?
Correct, but think about the messaging here, which is our topic, that the stories the stories that get reported in the traditional media seem to be about contention between the Doge personnel and the people on the ground, the experts in building. The messaging is not getting out that they're working well together at all, and this is. This I consider an issue that the Trump administration should think about. One of our questions, Tom, has to do with, is time my friend or my enemy? My sense is that for the Trump administration, time is not their friend on messaging,
Right.
that they need to start to think more about making sure that their messages are getting out to all of the channels, to reach all of the news recipients, not just their core supporters, but all of their recipients. And so this is something to think about. I'm sliding now into our discussion. We always have a discussion at the end, or when we get toward the end, about what we as business builders need to do to make sure we don't run into the same issue. It's making sure that your message is getting heard by all of the people who need to hear it. You know, for the Trump administration, it's not simply their core supporters, it's all of the people who either voted for them or may in the future want to vote for them, or who just have questions. They need more information about what's happening, or they're hearing one message, they don't quite believe it, but they're not hearing anything to counter that. That's where I believe the Trump people should be paying more attention.
Yeah.
For
So
us,
I would tell you though, every time you say that to me, I point to the actual secretary of that cabinet who has issued a formal statement. The White House has issued the formal statement. It just, and it's in, to both of us, it becomes frustrating and infuriating because what we're looking at is only like that feed from the White House, directly from the White House, 1 million people following it, 1 million. That's
right,
nothing. That is absolutely nothing. One of the cabinet secretaries, we looked at their personal feed, official personal feed from their area, which is an area you care about, right?
right,
It's the environmental, 500,000 people. I mean, it's
correct,
just nuts. It's nuts.
correct.
So, but again, you have to know and you have to look for that and you have to ask, right? So this
Yeah.
gets down to now, okay, now that we've defined that, whether how fragmented it is, who knows? But we do know that there are three different types of things going on in the media these days: traditional, new, short, long, and written, non-written. We know that. That right there tells you there's a potential distribution issue. So what does that mean for us if we're building something ourselves? It means that you have to find a way to make sure you are participating with all your constituents in all of those to make sure your message is being heard, right? Because
Absolutely.
just doing one thing, a long form meeting, or to do a video, short form video, that's not enough. You have to really cover that space of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of distribution. So if we can take anything away, including us, it's are we touching at least the number of those so we can make sure our message is getting getting out, and then secondly, being consumed, right? And then secondly, also, it's the other side too. It's your customers on one side, and it's your suppliers and so forth on the other, and distributors and so forth. So this has become a place where now the fragmentation of the media is a serious problem, and it's going to make it very difficult to get your message out. What does that leave you with? It means you have to be your own editor, basically.
You have to be your own editor. You have to be aware of this. You can't simply allow corporate communications or someone like that to do what they've traditionally been doing. Because I would say, Tom, it's really only in the past 5 years or so that we've seen this extreme fragmentation. But even so, remember, you as a business leader, as a business builder, you're not just dealing with the internal audiences, you have to deal with a whole lot of external audiences. I'm not just talking about marketing and selling. I'm talking about the financial markets. I'm talking about your relations with the various media. And again, suppliers and supply chains and all of the people who you will work with on on the platforms you're in your whole ecosystem. Business is being done differently now so that these ecosystems are very important. And certainly now, with some of the things we've talked about in previous videos, along the lines of how tariffs are going to change some things like supply chains and distribution programs and so forth, you have to be very much out there, making sure that you are heard and that your story is heard and your business is being heard. Another way to think about this, Tom, is that the more that you get your message out, the easier it is for you to accomplish what you want to accomplish. If people haven't heard about you and all of a sudden you raise your hand, they'll say, "Who is this?" Well, if you've been doing a good job of getting your message out one way or another through multiple channels, through multiple forms of distribution, short, long, print, video, all of the different permutations you were just talking about, Tom, the more you do that, then the easier it is for you to assure your place in the business landscape, in your marketplace going forward. And this covers all of your types of messages. What are you doing? What's happening in your business? What do you want to have happen in your business? What are your initiatives? What are you trying to accomplish with some of the things you're doing in business? It covers the whole territory, not simply your financial numbers. Messaging is way beyond that for business builders. It's the whole range of what you want, this whole range of people out there who want to hear about you or who need to hear about you, hear about you. I could go on in this vein, Tom, but let me throw it back to you here.
So to summarize, what the net of this is that you are it's really probably important that you become more of your own editor when you're
Correct.
thinking about um, how you consume the news. And we didn't even get into the makeup of a TikTok or the makeup of a Facebook or programs. We're staying more on those that try to focus on news. But you have to almost become your own editor, which is incredibly time consuming
Yes.
and takes not just time consuming on the amount of time you have to spend on it, but also a distance of time to be able to cover the territory. If you and I weren't doing this to try to help people figure this out, we would have a hard time. And it's even hard for me to recommend to people what they should, because I just don't know. It's all contextual, right? What are you trying to accomplish? Um, but that was the first thing. And then the second thing I would take away from it is just asking yourself, is your message being heard, being consumed, not being looked at, but being consumed by the people you want it to be consumed by? And have you done enough on touching those 6 forms that we talked about? And those may be just the beginning, um, to make sure that you're at least being heard. One of the thoughts, and this has been the thought that you and I continue to see, is that the administration's done an incredibly good job on the new media long and short form, that sort of thing. But even there, the distribution's not good enough. It's
Right.
just too fragmented and it's too low. The numbers are too low.
Right.
It's only when you do an interview with Elon Musk and Donald Trump do you get hundreds of millions of viewers, and who knows what the numbers are. But you don't get that kind of number. It's rare. So anyway, that's one thing. And then just being your own editor. So it's how do you get out and then make sure your business message is there and that you have developed a way of at least covering the ground.
Correct.
Deirdre, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom.